With the looming US election just around the corner, I thought it would be a good time to talk about protest music, and in particular, why the supergroup Prophets of Rage didn't succeed during one of the most tumultuous periods in America's political landscape.
The revolution will not be brought to you by the Schaefer Award Theater, and will not star Natalie Woods and Steve McQueen.
Well, considering now that Trump has almost as many assassination attempts as he has divorces, I figured I'd need to get this out sooner rather than later. I'm not gonna lie, I have been working on this script for nearly 12 months and rewritten it 5 times, only for Biden to call it quits, causing all of my original jokes to be largely useless. But don't worry, because no party is safe on this episode. More or less, and pretty much my original script boiled down to:
welcome to the cable access televised debate between a giant douche and a turd sandwich.
Yes, I guess this episode is going to be stirring the pot of proverbial dogs and cats, but anyway.
They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, they're eating the pets.
Protest music. I think most people would correctly associate this to the Vietnam War era, with bands like Creedence Clearwater Revival, Edwin Starr, Black Sabbath, Neil Young, and Bob Dylan, with many of these artists featuring even on the Battlefield Vietnam soundtrack. Now, if the stats on my YouTube channel are correct, then most of my fan base are American males who most likely would have played this awesome game, which just charts all over the latest efforts being released by EA. But music and protesting have gone hand in hand since a long time before then. Take for example the song I Didn't Raise My Boy to Be a Soldier by Alfred Bryan being one of the earliest examples of an anti-war song released in 1914, or even the iconic tune Old Man River used in the play called Showboat in 1927, which is about the hardships faced by African Americans.
On the Mississippi, darkies all week while the white folks play.
As can be evident by the release dates of many of these songs, the source of inspiration is usually caused by the events of the day. It can help sway people's minds when it came to the 1972 US election, as after Richard Nixon won back, of course, the anti-Vietnam War movement.
Computers may be twice as fast as they were in 1973, but your average voter is as drunk and stupid as ever.
Still, it isn't always war that spurs the soundtrack for a movie like Forrest Gump, but it can also be inspired by real-life events of injustice. NWA's song Fuck the Police doesn't need much of an introduction. Everyone knows what they are saying from the start of the tune, and it was inspired by real life events when NWA were harassed by the LAPD.
What we do?
Hey, get down. Get on the ground, now.
Get your punk ass on the ground. Let's go. Get the fuck down.
Hands behind your back, interlock your fingers.
Ever since then, the song has been used multiple times during Black Lives Matter protests or against police brutality in general. Hell, even in Australia, another NWA song was used as a piece of protest by the radio station Triple J when they played Express Yourself 360 times in a row over 24 hours back in 1989. The history was that Triple J was the first radio station in the world to allow an uncensored version of song of Fuck the Police to be played, and after 6 months, they were forced to pull it from the airwaves. Even the Fairfax media branded the station's resistance as one of the strangest and most controversial protests in Australian radio history, but that's because it's Murdoch Media and they are run by a bunch of brain-dead wombats. Around this time, another band were getting in on the mix, with Rage Against the Machine performing their signature sound of alt-rock stimulated by communist rhetoric and staunch anti-capitalist behaviour that even caused Wall Street to shut down during one of their music videos when they performed out the front of the stock exchange. Another group of this era was Public Enemy, and they would even release tunes such as Fight the Power, which talks about revolution. Fight the power! Cypress Hill would even get in on the action with a little tune called Pigs from their debut album, and is similar in vein to NWA's Fuck the Police with its message. All of these musicians were of course protesting in the way that they knew how, and that was through their music, which brings us nicely to the band Prophets of Rage, a supergroup that is compiled of members from these 3 groups, and was formed in 2016 as a direct reason of the US election in that year. Be Real, Chuck D, Tom Morello, Tim Comerfield, DJ Lord, and Brad Wilk. These are all members of the supergroup that released 1 EP and 1 album before going on hiatus in 2019 after 3 years. And this really made sense that they would come together to write music to protest against Trump. So why did it go wrong? And why didn't it work? There is a multitude of reasons when it comes to the failures of this band. First and foremost is that these supergroups rarely work out. I could count on one hand the number of memorable supergroups with Cream, Velvet Revolver, and Audio Slave, and these are 3 examples that I would select, and ironically members of Prophets of Rage were in fact members of Audio Slave. But then again, if you look at the number of supergroups that just didn't work out, and the numbers are just staggering, it all boils down to sounding good on paper, but not in the record studios. Don't get me wrong, a lot of the supergroups that have existed have either produced 1 or 2 solid tracks from their tenures, but very rarely does it work on an album level. There might be a sense of mutual appreciation for the music, or a goal in that this brings these musicians together to jam, and maybe the first time they nail it. But as the recording sessions draw out longer, it becomes a race against time, especially in a politically charged field. Almost as charged as your standard Twitter feed. Fuck, that place has become just a playground akin to the Mad Max series.
You're scum, Dementus! Scum!
Another factor would be the age of these musicians, who were perhaps largely forgotten by a newer generation of fans, and if you think that's an attack on Gen Z or the bands themselves, then you really need to watch some reaction videos, such as teenagers listening to Limp Bizkit for the first time ever. None of them had heard of that group or their music, and they were one of the biggest acts in the year 2000.
This is Limp Bizkit?
But that's the music industry for you, ever evolving and shifting towards the new and younger generation. So if you're 18 and saw a group of 50-year-olds yelling political statements, then of course you would feel confused and feel like it was just another Facebook comment section that would become only white noise. Okay, boomer, good one. Another issue I always felt regarding this record was the way that they presented their music, focusing on the record instead of releasing singles as appropriate. In this day and age, albums are becoming fairly irrelevant, as can be seen with most acts who just release a few singles here and there. And I thought the new supergroup would adapt to this new style, and of course attack the daily political headliners as such. I swear it felt like for 4 years you couldn't escape some kind of stupid headline made by insert media company here, and it was infuriating. But if they took the South Park approach to writing and recording, they could have released a new song every 6 days to keep it highly relevant to the ever-shifting newsreel in our fast-paced society. Instead, the band just stayed true to the tried and tested method of writing and recording an entire record. Oh well, kind of forgettable in the end. And this would also hurt the band because it would be relevant for about 15 minutes and then forgotten. The next reason that I want to talk about is when you are publicly aligning yourself with the political party, you will find opposition in others. And the more famous you are, the more likely it is that other famous celebrities will decry your works. Musicians such as Kid Rock and Ted Nugent would certainly not be attending these gigs anytime soon. And depending on how you feel about their music, perhaps that was a good thing. Still, you might be making enemies out of friends you once had. It was certainly a common trope during this time in our lives. I think the main reason for this band not quite landing as well as I thought is because their music is based on a political divide rather than political issues. What do I mean by this? Well, let's take a look at NWA for an example.
They have the authority to kill a minority.
It talks about an issue that was faced during that era, and many could relate to this message being said as it perhaps was happening to them, but it never blamed one political faction or another, instead focusing on the issue at hand, which allowed for anyone to enjoy their music. In this day and age, American politics feels a lot like sports. You pick your team and you barrack for them. In recent times, it has also been seen as an identity as well. So an attack on your party of preference is seen as an attack on you directly, which we have seen as politics has of course become more and more personal lately due to the number of people that are all getting involved and just feeling this deep down. So when you introduce a band that aligns themselves with one party and it's against the other, it doesn't matter if the issue is universal, you are immediately dividing half your potential fan base to be against you and your message. Now, I am disregarding the fan base that originally made these musicians famous, but people grow up over time, and what people perceived as a great message 30 years ago might be different now. I've always viewed Rage Against the Machine as this anti-capitalist band, but now I can acknowledge that they were a group that was signed to a record label, performing in stadiums and making money by selling records at concerts. Sure, you can argue that they had to work the system to preach their message, and of course they were out the front front at concerts discussing and selling communist manifestos, but no one forced them to sign contracts with Sony via Epic Records at the end of the day. Semantics aside, and probably the most important factor about this music is the material itself, which was not exactly A+ material, or at the end of the day it just wasn't memorable enough despite that strong conviction. Ultimately, this is not Rage Against the Machine, nor is it Public Enemy, or even Cypress Hill. It's a weird Frankenstein's monster version of these bands, and as someone pointed out on Reddit, these rappers didn't have the same flow as Zack, and this didn't fit the metal mold that was presented by the rest of the group. As a one-off song contribution, it could have worked, and has done so in the past for all of these groups, but not as the effort we hear it now. Don't get me wrong, Unfuck the World is certainly a strong single, but I believe that all the points that I've just mentioned before culminated in a failed effort that saw the group quit before Trump's second impeachment could even begin. The last thing I want to mention is how this content they created would age, and the answer is not very well over the course of time. The message was highly relevant for its era, but given time passing, you might just find this in a dollar bargain bin at your local record store, especially after the next, 4 or 8 years. The last major contributing factor that I see is the target audience itself, which is primarily a younger generation that weren't interested in angry sounding music, but rather more focused on TikTok video length messages provided by whoever they followed, or were more content with sending each other the latest memes with the theme of that day. Our new audience either doesn't care for what is on offer, or doesn't have the attention span for a video like this in its duration, but most importantly, they need to find a voice amongst their own peers who can relate to all of this rather than a bunch of rich old rock musicians to deliver that message, and I don't believe anyone has done so yet, or at least not in the way that we imagined it to be. I'm sure that there are many other reasons, but this is at least my thoughts on the matter and why Prophets of Rage certainly didn't get the traction that I thought they could. But maybe we will see a second chance depending how this election goes tomorrow. Good luck, America. The international community is all watching you with popcorn at our sides because frankly, there's no good TV shows on at the moment, and I think the attack on Capitol Hill led by Jamiroquai was one of the most enthralling pieces of media recently released. Anyway, let's see what the future holds for the rest of the world in Civil War Act Number 2.
If you've enjoyed this content, make sure to smash that like button, subscribe to us, and stay notified for future music related content because it keeps our manager happy at the end of the day. We are also on Discord, Instagram, Facebook, and all those other social platforms if you want to check us out. As always, people, you have a great day and stay spicy.